Good morning, everyone. It's week 2. We made it. Hopefully, everyone survived a little bit of that Thursday night. Everyone's not trying to make up Christian McCaffrey points that they didn't get that we were counting on. I'll let some people trickle in here. As you know, I just sent the relink out, the announcement for the new link. So hopefully, we'll get some people coming in. Just kind of talk about whatever you guys want to take things. Whether it be DFS, start sits, any betting lines, player props, anything like that. Wherever you guys want to take it, we're going to let you guys decide. I'll let some questions fill in, like I said, see if we can get a couple people in here to fill the board up. I'll go over a couple games just real early as we let some people in. A lot of the DFS plays will obviously be centered around the two main late games. Obviously Chiefs Oakland and the Saints Rams. Even though Saints Rams looks like they're going to go under-owned in totality in comparison. The Chiefs the Chiefs Oakland game is the highest over/under of the week. And then we also, because Denver played on last Monday night and DFS pricing comes out on Sunday evenings, that all the Raiders guys got priced like basically grandfathered into their week 1 pricing. So guys like Josh Jacobs and Tyrell Williams and Darren Waller are just severely underpriced. So their ownership's going to be sky high. Josh Jacobs is projected to be the highest on running back on both sites. He's definitely a guy I think you could look at as a definite tournament fade at that ownership. I mean, in cash, it's going to be real hard to get away from on either site just based on the touches. Only 3 running backs had more touches than him last week. It'll be curious to see how he plays throughout negative game script if we get that here with them being 7-point underdogs, but he's a guy that has pass catching pedigree a little bit. He can catch the ball, 10.5 yards per target at Alabama last year. So I mean, we can still see him catch the football and get value through that way too. It's just more of an unknown. But probably some of the more interesting pieces in that game is probably McCole Hardman. What are the Chiefs going to do with McCole Hardman? This week he played 53 snaps. He ran 27 pass routes. He's a guy that kind of has a lot of direct overlap an ability to what Tyreek Hill does from a functionality stance. He's not Tyreek Hill, and asking him to be Tyreek Hill isn't something that's going to happen. But one of those jack of all trade guys, had rushing ability, a lot of return ability, average over 20 yards per punt return at Georgia. They can get creative with him in the touch game. We saw that in the preseason when he had the rushing touchdown too. So I mean, he's not going to be Tyreek Hill, but he can be used in a similar capacity in terms of like types of touches they can get him. Deep balls and mix it at the run game and stuff like that. So he's kind of like the flyer play out of that game that has, like I said, the highest total. And then I'm higher than the industry on Derek Carr this week. He's been the QB4 and the QB2 the last 2 times them teams have played in Oakland. The Raiders have scored over 30 points in both those games as well. He's thrown for 417 yards, 285, 3 touchdowns in each game. I think he'd be my top streamer this week. It'd be him and then Josh Allen. Would be the top 2 guys. If you're streaming a quarterback this week, if you had to go out and, I'm sure a lot of you guys probably had Jameis and left him on the bench, for which was the right call, and maybe taking on a quarterback play this week as a substitute. So I mean, those would be my top 2 guys. Would be Derek Carr and Josh Allen. If you're going that route into the well this week. Let's see what we got here. I'll start hitting some of these from Zorba Zettler, ZZ Top. He's got the Gloomhaven for the win too. Great game. I won't eat up too much. I won't eat up any time talking about it here. But find me on Twitter if you ever want to talk about it. Wentz or Brady in a league with big bonuses for long TDs. I mean, those are tough to play. Like when you're playing, just saying you're going to count on the bonus. Just because they have such low percentage of being actual touchdowns anyways and hitting those touchdowns. I really wouldn't let that really affect me. I do have Brady higher than Wentz. I have them both as top 5 plays though this week. So I mean, it's a good question to ask. It's a conundrum of 2 good plays. There's probably more back and forth potential between Atlanta and Philly. But I mean, you just look at what we saw the Dolphins come out and perform last week. It would be just hard not to just go in and let Brady light them up. They allowed 6 passing touchdowns to the Ravens. The Ravens pass catchers, now they're getting Julian Edelman, Josh Gordon, Antonio Brown's going to be on the field. They're still going to get James White looks. It's just an objectively better offense the Patriots are than the Ravens. So I mean, it's just hard for me not to go and smash Brady based on what we saw the Dolphins and how they performed in week 1, and not really anticipating to get a lot better for them as they are openly trying to lose games. And now Micah Fitzpatrick, just basically doesn't want to play for him. It's just I have Brady as QB2 this week. I mean, I feel really good if you have Brady, and obviously if you drafted Brady while he was depressed all summer, you're in a real good spot because you got all that good news the last 3 weeks, of the preseason. Gordon came back and was going to be available week 1, and they get Antonio Brown, and Brady's outlook goes from being like a mid QB2 to back being like in that QB1 area. So I know a lot of people grabbed Brady late, and they run into those problems like when's their Brady. What to do with Le'Veon? Yeah, if you picked up Tymo, just wait until tomorrow if you have a direct pivot. But I would want to play Le'Veon still as an RB1 over the majority of plays. Definitely a guy like Carrion, who has a little bit of didn't hit in a great spot last week. It was a letdown. Carrion was one of probably the bigger letdowns of week 1. Now they go home. They're going to play a lot slower paced game. I mean, you think about last week, they ran 80 offensive plays. It's going to be a lot slower this week. The Chargers were dead last in offensive pace. In 2018, they were 29th in week 1. They're coming off an overtime game. Both teams are coming off of an overtime game. It's only the second time in 20 years we've had a week 2 matchup of 2 overtime games from week 1. Just expect a lot slower pace, a better, he's going against a better defense. He's still in the RB2 range for me, but I would still want to play Le'Veon over him if I have Le'Veon, especially if I have Le'Veon's direct backup. But yeah, by all accounts, Le'Veon looks good to go tomorrow. Maybe he won't play 100% of snaps, but I would still be in on him. And he'll still catch a lot of passes too. The Oakland prices have to play Tyrell and Cash. Yeah, I think out of the 3, the most I'm universally in on is Tyrell, just based on the outlooks of where they're priced per position. So I mean, with Darren Waller, he on DraftKings is at 3,300 smash. Just you get him in and wedge him in. But you don't if if you're feeling like in a cash lineup, you want to play one of these 3 guys. You don't want to play all 3, that is. Like, say you don't want to play all 3 because it's just too much exposure to Oakland. I think you don't play Josh Jacobs because you're saying we're not going to get any rushing touchdowns. So we'll play Waller and Williams. Or you go the inverse route and you just play Jacobs. But I do like Tyrell probably the most based on just the context of where he's priced at his position. Universally on DraftKings, that's a different story because it's Josh Jacobs is 4,700 there, and it's just probably $1,600 too low on that specific site. But if you're talking about just a blanket play across all sites, Tyrell being priced as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and a guy that I have in the top 15, it's hard to get other arbitrage plays in that same area of payment. Whereas like you can say we can play Waller, but we can go up a little bit to Ingram, or a guy like Hawkinson. And like, what's the gap from is the gap really going to be that cavernous between Waller and those other tight ends, or Jacobs and some of those other running backs in that same group, like the Breedas of the world. But Tyrell Williams in the same price context of like a $5,900 wide receiver is a lot better play there. So I'm on all those guys in various spots in various the DFS sites. Definitely check out all 3 sites. Like I said, I'd talk about Yahoo. Definitely look at Yahoo if you haven't started playing there. Their pricing is a lot different, and they're not really charging rake for tournaments. Their tournament structure, payout structure is just the better of all 3 sites. We talk about the 10-10 double up rule, and I bring it up every week. We want first place to get 10%, and we want 10 place to get 10% of first place, and we want everyone that cashes the double up. That's what you look for in tournaments, and Yahoo's got a plethora of those types of tournaments. Tim Andrews is asking, he's stuck on whether to play Jamison Crowder or Chris Thompson in the flex. I would still play Jamison Crowder. That is, I mean, the target volume is still going to run through him, Le'Veon, and Robbie. Trevor Simeon's fine, like for backup capabilities. Like, he's not a dude that's gonna like totally torpedo this thing. He's a guy that he put up functionality with Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas when he last started in 2017. The downside with Trevor Simeon is he's not really a guy that takes a lot of deep shots. He was 27th in the NFL in deep target rate when we last saw him in 2017. So that kind of dings Robbie a little bit. It brings Robbie more to like a flex wide receiver 4. But Crowder really doesn't change his outlook. He's still a guy that's predicated on volume, like wide receiver 3 volume based guy. The thing with Chris Thompson is, and I think Chris Thompson's fine as like a floor flex, but Chris Thompson had 10 targets last week. But he had 4 catches and 6 targets on the very last drive of that game. They had a 15-play drive to get that backdoor cover, and Chris Thompson had 6 targets, 4 catches for 40 yards on that final drive. If Washington goes like 3 and out that drive, or like just only runs 5 or 6 plays, just a couple first downs, like Thompson's line looks a lot different than what it was. Because it's really easy to go look at the box score and say, man, he got 10 targets. But a little further into the context, you say, oh man, 6 of those 10 came on the very last drive of the game. Maybe that target ceiling's not quite as high. So I mean, I still would lean Crowder there to bring that all back. Nick is asking a PPR league. He's got one of Mixon, Aaron Jones, or Alshon Jeffrey. So the Mixon thing. So Mixon's active. Talk a little bit about this, and it didn't hit on Thursday because obviously Greg Olsen had a really good game on Thursday. But I mean, overall, I am just, when guys play hurt or they've been listed and played through questionable tags, I am typically, I ding them. And move them down, in rankings, and I really adjust my expectations, and that's what we're doing with Mixon. He's a home favorite too, as well this week, so it could be a situation where he doesn't even have to play the full allotment of snaps if the game script kind of gets there. They're only at 1-point favorites, but if they are able to control that game, maybe he's a guy that's not going to even push 20 touches. Maybe he has a 12 to 15 touch cap, or re-aggravates the injury. They also are a team that just didn't run well last, and it was against Seattle in Seattle, but it's just one of those things where he goes from being like a locked in top 12 play, and I moved him down to RB20 this week. So I mean, that's about like where I'd say maybe a lower end RB2. I think you could trust a little bit of the more involvement from a guy like Aaron Jones. I would lean Aaron Jones more than Alshon still. I mean, Alshon's just a tricky guy to play over a running back, just because we're talking about getting guaranteed touches. Alshon's been under 70 receiving yards now in 8 of his past 10 games. You got to get a touchdown from him. So I mean, I would lean either of those backs over Alshon, and I would probably just trust Aaron Jones's touch volume a little bit more, to be honest. I understand it's hard to sit Mixon, and I'm not really saying anyone has to rush him out of lineups. I would just really lower expectations this week, playing through that questionable tag and having that, that ankle injury. Lewis is asking about Drew Brees on the road. I mean, I still feel good about Brees this week. If you look at last year, Brees' road splits weren't a problem until he had that phantom injury. The injury that no one will report, but we know happened on Thanksgiving when he tried to make that tackle on that interception, and then the rest of the season, his deep ball just died, and he couldn't throw the ball downfield. So I'm still high on Brees on the road. I don't think Taysom Hill really devalues him a ton. It is frustrating that it happens, that he keeps coming out in the red zone and near the goal line on these just bizarre plays where we got to get Taysom Hill in on these plays. Everyone knows what Taysom Hill's doing too on the plays where he's under center or in shotgun behind center. It's different when they flex him out and he got the touchdown catch. But you're running RPO like when he's there, like when he's in shotgun. So I mean, that part, he's not sneaking up on anyone, but they keep getting him on the field in those spots. And in terms of like expected points added per play, like Taysom Hill actually is a positive. So I think that's why they probably keep doing it. They probably keep getting reports that this is a pro for their offense, but it's frustrating for us. But I don't think he really devalues him a ton. Scott said, "Yeah, we like the Vikings receivers for a bounce back." Yeah, I do. I mean, I still have them both not as wide receiver ones, but definitely I think we get them back in the wide receiver 2 plus upsides. I talked about this a little bit yesterday on that show. Just since they hired Kevin Stefanski, their 3 wins have been blowouts. They've had 3 blowout wins, all by 2 touchdowns or more. And in those games, the passing games just died. But, we're getting them as road dogs this week against a Packers defense that is objectively poor against wide receiver play. They were poor in week 1 against Allen Robinson, who could have had even more. Kirk Cousins had 2 really successful games against them last year, but it was without Stefanski as the OC. But we're, I said, getting those road dogs, we're counting on more passing volume. The matchup's good. Jair Alexander's out. It's just a better spot for them. I think they have more upside and not be just so terrified of what they did in week 1 and what the Vikings did offensively in week 1. I think they'll have a little bit harder time running the football against that Packers front, which is a really improved front 7, and they played the run well on Thursday. They'll have to throw more in week 2. So I would still not look to pull guys out of the lineups. I had a lot of questions this week on Twitter about benching Thielen for guys that were like wide receiver 3 type guys, and Diggs. So I mean, I would still play those guys. Josh Gordon's expectation this week. I mean, he ran a lot fewer routes than Dorsett last week. He was kind of used as like the third wheel, but when he was in the game, they dialed up plays for him, which is a positive. Obviously, all like systems are go against the Dolphins. If you wanted to play a guy like Waller in like a full PPR, maybe, but I mean, we're still talking about wide receivers generally outscore on a brass tacks median basis. They outscore tight ends. I mean, maybe like a Kelsey Kittle, but like wide receivers are just going to, they just have their catches are more valuable than tight end catches. If you're in like a tight end premium league or something like that, it alters things. But just on the surface level, wide receiver targets are more valuable than tight end targets that carry more fantasy weight. So I mean, Waller could be a guy that has double the targets of Josh Gordon, but Josh Gordon could easily still best him. So I mean, I'm always going to side with the wide receiver play over tight end play unless it's really one of those apex guys. Maybe Waller gets there at some point this season, but I would still say that Josh Gordon's targets are going to be more have more fantasy weight and more fantasy appeal than Waller's targets in comparison of just an apples to apples. The Salsa King is asking PPR, Sony, Carrion, Thompson, or Singletary. Even in full PPR, I would have Sony. I have Sony the highest of all those guys. You look at last year when they were a touchdown or more favorite. He averaged 89 rushing yards per game, and they were 10 or double-digit point favorites, I should say, before I get tongue-tied there. He smashed in all the games except for Week 17. He had 18 for 118 and a touchdown. He had 96 and a touchdown in another game. He averaged 18.2 carries per game in those 4 games. They were double-digit point favorites last year. So it's just a good spot against Miami. They couldn't stop the power run game from the Ravens a week ago, allowed 191 rushing yards to them. So, I mean, it's a good get-right spot, I think, for Sony as well. Although Sony, if he does have a good game, like he's a guy that if he comes back and hammers today, he's a dude to dangle out, like especially in like 2-for-1s too, where you can upgrade, because we talked about it a little bit last week. Sony's one of these guys, and Salsa King's got him in a full PPR, which is a great example of this. So last year, Sony only had 3 games where he was a top 12 running back in full PPR, but he had 7 games where he was in the RB 40s or lower. Because you're just not getting those catches. If you don't get the touchdowns, you don't get him in favorable game script where he can get that rushing value. The disparity from floor and ceiling is just so drastic. So I mean, if you've got him in a full PPR, say he comes and smashes this week, you can say, yeah, look, that week 1 was just an accident. Maybe you can dangle him in like a 2-for-1 upgrade. Joshua is asking flex PPR. I'm guessing this Kenny Stills, Hardman, or McLaurin. I have McLaurin the highest of those 3 guys. Hardman to me, like for season long, is probably still a no-go. But great tournament stacking option, especially on FanDuel where he's just 200 over the minimum. Not really looking to rush him out in season long, so just still more of a dart. McLaurin, though, I mean, he played 93% of the snaps, had 7 targets. He was 8th in the entire NFL in air yards in week 1. To me, on a team that's going to have to throw repeatedly the course of this whole season, McLaurin's basically going to be a wide receiver 3+. One of those guys that we always are going to count on some of the volume as a wide receiver 3, but the team construct kind of gives him some volatility, but he carries that upside, but enough volume to warrant being played. Kenny Stills, reduction of snaps, obviously we expected that his first week with the team. Kiki QT is on track to play. I actually didn't see if he was active or not. If someone can pop that in the chat, that would be cool can verify if QT was active. Obviously if he wasn't, but then, we're getting them as home favorites too, the Texans. So we'll probably not see them throw like they did on Monday night to the degree. And we saw last year Bill O'Brien in games that they were really controlled game script kind of reduce the overall volume for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson had a lot of stretch of games midseason where he threw 26 or fewer passes repeatedly. So we're talking about getting the 3rd target of a passing game that's only going to have 25 or so targets to go around. It's a lot tougher to play those guys. Whereas we're talking about Terry McLaurin, we have a team that can throw 35 times and a guy that can get 15 to 20% of those targets and is getting high upside targets too. So I mean, I would lean McLaurin out of those guys. Thanks, Scott, for popping that in. That QT is in fact active. Hector is asking full PPR, Duke Johnson or Josh Gordon. There, I would lean towards Duke Johnson just for the touches, and we know that it's a handful of touches are going to be PPR, so we're getting catches from him, and we're getting touch volume that we can count on. Nick, I would double down on the same things that echo my thoughts on McLaurin in between your D.D. Westbrook, Robbie Anderson, McLaurin thoughts. I have McLaurin the highest of those guys. D.D. Westbrook, that target split, he was still ahead of the other Jaguars when Minshew came in the game, and he's got a good matchup in the slot, but just doesn't carry the upside, with the types of targets he gets this week. It doesn't have as good a matchup against not the Chiefs matchup that we had last week. And then Robbie A, we talked about Simeon's little bit of a lack of a deep ball last time we saw him on the field and how that will impact Robbie A. I would still hold on to Robbie A unless, someone's willing to pay, for him. I still wouldn't cut bait yet. Week 1, he had 2 touchdowns that probably should have been touchdowns. The very last drive of that game really would have changed his, overall outlook. He still had 7 targets. The offense is still, until Herndon comes back, it's still going to be him, Crowder, and Le'Veon. That's really all they got. Demarius is going to only be there. He's only going to have 1 week with the team. And Noon was shut down. I still think Robbie A is still a guy that you don't have to run away from at this point, and cut bait with, I should say. Season long whiffed at 0 RB. So hoarding running backs on my bench. Would you rather play a Broncos D and start Kyler, or New Orleans D and start Carr? It would be the latter for me. I would. I'm not really worried about defense. I just want to make the better play, and I have Carr higher. The other thing too is that we're talking about fantasy defenses, and I don't know what your specific league defensive scoring is. It could always be one of those things where you can say, "Not in my league. Our scoring is this." But typically, points allowed and yardage don't really impact fantasy defenses that much. And when you get in these games, these shootouts, Jonathan Bales has wrote about it, especially from a DFS stance, that it's okay to pick defenses from these types of shootout games. We saw it last year when the Chiefs and Rams played. Remember that game, the 54-51 game? There was 3 defensive touchdowns in that game. What we want to chase constantly is dropbacks, because that's how we score fantasy points defense. We get sacks, we get turnover opportunities. That's how we typically score, points, and getting dropbacks. I mean, I'm never too terrified about that unless my defense scoring system is a little bit different, which can vary league to league. But from a brass tacks, just general population, defensive take, you don't have to completely run away from defenses in these types of shootouts, because really if you're not getting a defensive touchdown anyways, the gap is thin anyways between these scoring between these teams, team defenses, that is. Appreciate you, Will. Oh, play a defense at all. Kevin is asking if you should play a defense at all. All right, sorry I didn't read that. It's because I get it. So you want to hoard defenses? Am I getting, or you want to hoard running backs, not cut a running back? Gotcha. So I don't know, who do you have then? You have Broncos D? Not to just make it like a chat where I'm just. I don't think I'm reading it right. Everyone could probably smack me in the face because I'm looking like an idiot trying to read it, but. Oh, you have Kyler and Carr and no defense. Do I have that correct? I would drop one of the quarterbacks. It's fine. No, you can always get quarterbacks and play it. Gotcha. Okay, yeah. No, it's not New Orleans D. It's no D. Okay, now I feel like a real idiot. Gotcha. Yeah, you could drop a quarterback. You don't have to hold 2 quarterbacks. You can always get a quarterback afterwards. So yeah, I would definitely not take a 0. I would take some points. Gotcha. No, I feel like an idiot. Do I think that Brady has 5 TDs today? Maybe. Based on what we saw last week, and maybe it's not a regular thing for the Dolphins, or they're going to be that bad. But we actively know that they're not trying to win games. We know that Belichick and the Patriots have had kind of a sketchy history in Miami to begin with. I doubt that they down throttle until later in that game. I think that they'll definitely put up in the 30s. So Brady's probably going to get a big piece of that. All right, Chicken Fly 49. Half PPR, Djax or Gallup. That's a good one. I have Djax a little bit higher than Gallup. Not a huge gap between them, but I just think that the way they used Djax last week, the Eagles, he matched Keenan Allen for percent of targets in the slot. On percent of routes he was targeted to match a guy like Keenan Allen, and he's not a Keenan Allen type. Like, he's not a guy that works the interior, but they moved him into the slot and they're using him on free releases and getting him vertical shots. And of course, he led the team in targets last week. That will probably oscillate. Ertz, Alshon, and Djax will probably fluctuate week to week. But if you're going to tell me that they're going to use him creatively and enhance him, because he only had 7 targets in the slot all last year with Tampa Bay, so they're going to use him more creatively. And the Eagles are just a team that we know has an edge on using personnel over the league, regardless. I definitely like that. I like the creativity. I love the upside. I think that game just has a more propensity to be back and forth as well, the Eagles-Falcons game, than it does the Dallas game. Dallas being, big favorites. How do I feel about Ryan Griffin? Yeah, I mean, he's kind of sneaky. I like that you brought up Macca. He's got good takes. He was in here Thursday with a lot of good takes too. So Ryan Griffin ran more pass routes than any tight end in the league. He also had a touchdown called back due to penalty in that game. So I mean, if he could have been on, that would have just brought more attention to him. The targets weren't really there for the types of routes he was running, but we're gonna get Simeon in the lineup. Like I said, he's more of an interior passer. Cleveland rolled over all their just bad tight end play. We said, well, maybe we'll give them a shot to see if it was just them getting rid of Greg Williams, but it turns out it's just their linebacker. Their linebackers are slow. Schobert's a good linebacker, but they're slow in coverage. The teams can run misdirection on them for success. So I mean, I think he's sneaky. I think he's sneaky. A sneaky tight end play, a sneaky tight end streamer, that is, this week. Maybe if you were holding out hopes for Jordan Reed, if he was going to play, or you just, have someone that you're just not really high on this week. I definitely think he's in a sneaky tight end streaming conversation this week. Big Ben or Brady for DraftKings cash. I mean, I would have Brady higher. I think Ben is definitely a great tournament play. That's a game that we haven't talked about that I think is a good shot to go over, the Seattle Steelers game. That one could be one of those games. We know inherently the Steelers are better at home. Big Ben's road splits have been talked about for years. Seattle just gave 400 passing yards to Andy Dalton. So, I mean, I think that game has a lot of chance to go back and forth because the Steelers are going to force the Seahawks to come out of that shell a little bit. We saw it again last week. They threw 20 passes. We have to live this life with Russell Wilson again, where you're asking him to do a lot and very little. But this week, I think that they're definitely going to throw a lot more than 20 passes this week. I definitely like that game. I think it closed at 47 in a lot of places. I think that's a great tournament stacking game for upside. And it looks like James Washington's going to get more burn. The early reports from the beats there, James Washington's going to play more this week. So we might already start to see the overtaking of Washington over Moncrief, especially if Moncrief doubles down and plays how he did last Sunday night. So, I mean, that game has a lot of stacking potential. Also, Tyler Lockett, he's going to have more than 2 targets today. Pittsburgh really doesn't alter their defensive game plan approach. We've seen it, historically over the past few years. They're not a team that really moves their personnel around. And in week 1, they rolled over what happened all last year. They just got crushed in the slot. Steelers, Patriots last week, they had Patriots receivers had 11 catches for 224 yards and 3 touchdowns from the slot. And they weren't, like I said, these aren't all Julian Edelman tertiary targets. Philip Dorsett caught that long one from the slot. Josh Gordon caught his long one down the middle of the field from the slot. Like I said, we're talking 22 yards a catch from the slot. Tyler Lockett is going to get a lot of those home run opportunities from the slot today. So yeah, that was So Jason is asking Tyler Boyd, Matt Breida, or John Brown for the flex in half PPR. I would lean Breida there just because it's not full PPR, and we want to play in the touch game typically, with running backs in half PPR. And then out of the 2 receivers, I have them Boyd and John Brown, 2 also very good options I have as wide receiver 3+ plays in rankings this week as well. Boyd runs into another good matchup too this week. Godwin didn't fully exploit it, but he got the touchdown last week. Boyd had a touchdown that Dalton missed him on a play in the seam last week, man, where he ran like a double move in the seam and Dalton shorted him. It would have been nice because I had a lot of Boyd in cash last week and he was fine, but it would have been a lot better. Let's see, Breeze or Rodgers. Definitely Breeze for me. Just better matchup. Game has a chance to go over the game total a lot higher than I feel like Rodgers versus the Vikings. Rodgers' history versus Zimmer is not strong. And then the offense still, we just don't know if it's how it's going to come together yet. They ran a lot of 12 and 21 personnel that game against the Bears. Bears obviously a really good defense. Vikings also a really good defense, but if they're not a team that's really going to try to like open things up and play a lot of spread, and he still threw. Rodgers was 4 or 5 on play action, and he was great in a play action on Thursday, but five pass attempts again, just 5 on play action. They got to run play action a lot more. The Packers. They really have to run it more. Drives me crazy. And then you're asking, I guess a Mark Andrews or TJ Hawkinson. I would have Mark Andrews a little bit higher. The Lions in general, just to talk about them, because all their guys smashed last week, obviously, it was a spot we expected them to do well. Said 80 offensive plays. This is typically one of the slower teams in the NFL. So they got the tide raised by 1 overtime and 2 facing Arizona, who was just going to play fast. They were number 1 in tempo week 1. That's just going to be a regularity for them. So I think this week playing against the Chargers, I think we'll see that game probably come back, and we'll see both teams run play counts like probably in the high 50s, like high 50s, low 60s. So we'll probably see the Lions lose about 20 offensive plays based on what they had last week against the better defense this week in the Chargers. So, I mean, I would just have a little more lower my expectations based on what we saw from the Lions offense last week. A guy like Hawkinson, though, I still think is in the mix as a lower tight end 1. I just have Mark Andrews a little bit higher because Mark Andrews was second to George Kittle in target per route run rate in week 1. He still smashed target share on the team target share. He was still by far the guy that they threw to the most. And then he's getting the same matchup that Hawkinson played. He's getting that Arizona, play value. Couldn't guard Hawkinson. He's another one of those tight ends too. It gets more vertical targets than the typical tight end type of targets. So I mean, I'm high on Mark Andrews. Still having another strong performance in week 2. Joe is asking about Henry or Sony and DK. I can run down the ownership for you right now. In cash, I would rather play Henry just because we know he's going to play more snaps. I can tell you where you can get your leverage if you're thinking about non-cash though. And I'm going to pull it up here. If you're thinking about tournaments, if that's something you have a question on. And right now, yeah, projected ownership for Henry is lower than Sony, so he would be your leverage play for ownership to go over on. And we talked about it last week. Someone had a leverage question here last week about Mark Ingram, and it was Dalvin Cook. And Dalvin Cook ended up being so owned, and he hit. But Mark Ingram was so much cheaper and also hit that. So I mean, the leverage play worked out. I hope the rest of his team was also also good around that because he hit the leverage spot. Alvin Kamara over Dalvin, Connor. I mean, Kamara he's just in such a good spot. And he's going to be the highest owned running back probably for cash games outside of Josh Jacobs this week. But he's crushed the Rams all 3 times they've played. Over 100 yards of scrimmage all 3 of those games that they've played, and these 2 regimes have met, so we can kind of use that sample. I like to use samples when you use the team versus team splits, or like the B versus P splits, like the splits like you would use in like MLB. I only like to use them typically when it's like you have the same regimes, and you can count, and you can count a lot of those samples. And we've had 3 matchup with these Sean Payton and Sean McVay regimes the last 3 years, and Kamara's given them problems all 3 games. And the way they used Kamara last week, and this is just a big time plus. Kamara played his most snaps and his highest share of the Saints snaps since week 4 of last year, which was the last week he played without Mark Ingram on the field. So if we get a boost, and he's going to play a lot more than we saw him play, and it's not just Latavius taking over the Ingram role, which didn't happen in week 1, we see the kind of upside like Kamara has. Like he has upside to be the best running back in fantasy, on a week-to-week basis if he's going to be that. The only thing that in drafts that like had him below McCaffrey and Saquon, even though he was still a universal top 4 pick, was that the Saints have just always shown us that they are willing to, use a secondary guy, whereas those other guys were just going to play, 90% of the team snaps every week. Non PPR. ZZ Top is asking MVS or Malcolm Brown. I would play Malcolm Brown there in non PPR. You're chasing the touchdown. Rumor is that he is going to maintain, the goal line opportunities. I still would like to see more where he wasn't just the back end on the drive. I actually want to see him get subbed in on the goal line before I just say like that's an absolute truth. But if you're chasing a touchdown, it's one of the games, the highest game totals of the week, 52 points. And if he's going to get those touches near the goal line, where it's non PPR anyways to begin with, I would rather do that. I'd rather chase that touchdown. Well, Will, we talked about Joe Mixon a little bit. He just gets dinged. He moves from, a lower end RB1 to a lower end RB2. I lower my expectations. It's still hard for me to bench him, especially for a guy like John Brown. Because we're counting on, touches and scoring opportunities still. If you went in that direction, I think that's fine. I really wouldn't push back on it because, like I said, I'm lowering my expectations for Joe Mixon. But as far as just removing him from lineups outright, I still want to have someone, in a comparable, situation to where I'm moving him down to. And I would still play like an RB20 over, the wide receiver 30. Jason said I skipped him. I don't know if it's if I got to it or not. Oh, no, he's got it. Got it on there. Sean is asking about Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, Kerryon, or Singletary. That was pretty similar to the one that we had above with Mixon, and where I say you could just trust Aaron Jones a little bit more in the way he can be used. Same thing with Kerryon. The way that they're going to get we can just count on them a little bit more than Mixon, where he moved his floor to. I would still have Mixon over a guy like Singletary though. So with Devin Singletary, he played 45 snaps last week, but he ran 37 pass routes. When they were running the football, they still played Frank Gore. And with them being favorites this week against the Giants, I want to see Devin Singletary get worked more into neutral script rushing value. That's the step we want to see take. He's still a flex option for me, but that's my one little small concern is that he got all that burn. They were down 16-0 and didn't come off the field then, but in neutral script, they were still using Gore a little bit. So, I want to see Devin Singletary get rushing value in neutral script for him to start getting into that RB2 conversation. Max still playing the Thursday through Sunday slate. I hope you didn't have McCaffrey. It would have been really hard to avoid McCaffrey. And that's what you're thinking. You're thinking Griffin. And then Deshaun, Jeffrey, or Julio for Sunday evening. Obviously, it's hard not to I'm assuming you have Julio locked in. It's Julio and his splits versus the Eagles, and even like you talk about when these regimes play, he's just absolutely roasted the Eagles. And we saw it happen with the Eagles last week. And the Eagles were a defense I streamed in a lot of season-long leagues, and they were a letdown. They had the same problems as always: complete pass funnel defense. They shut down the run and make teams throw, but their secondary just gives up splash plays regularly. And we saw it in week 1 against Washington. If they were playing a better team, I probably would have thought that was more of an opportunity. I did not expect I did not expect Case team to go over 380 on them. They're just a complete pass funnel defense to keep targeting. So, we love Julio, all his yardage opportunities tonight. Like I said, I lean Djax over Jeffrey just because I said Jeffrey has a little bit of a lower floor to me without a touchdown. I just really was encouraged by how the Eagles use Djax. If that's going to be something regularly and they're going to exploit him and use him in the slot and get him those advantages, I feel really good about Djax really smashing his season-long cost where a lot of people got him at, and even being more of a weekly commodity instead of just a volatile boom or bust play, being one of those guys that's a wide receiver 3+. Yeah, we talked about just the Stefanski, just the 10 pass attempts. You look at the 3 blowouts and you look at Cousins' pass attempts in those 3 games. There's just completely reduced, but they were like big time blowouts. These wins have been just completely one-dimensional types of game scripts. They blew out the Dolphins last year. They blew out the Lions last year. And then they blow out the Falcons in week 1. And Cousins, he's had 21, 28, and 10 pass attempts. They were the first team since 2017 to have 10 or fewer pass attempts in a game that they won. Like I said, I expect it to bounce back. I expect them to have more volume this week throwing the football as road dogs. I wouldn't be too crazy about, like I said, sitting those guys like Diggs and Thielen for wide receiver 3 types. Do I like Waller? Yeah, definitely, Robert. I'm in on all those guys. The Chiefs on the road allow 35 points per game. Last year they come back, they give up a positive, fantasy and scoring game to the Jaguars. They're just kind of an offense that raises all tides. When they go on the road, because Arrowhead's a tougher place to play. But the fewest amount of passing yards a team has had against the Chiefs since the start of last year at home has been 245, and that was Case Keenum. The other totals from top to bottom: Russell Wilson at home 271, Derek Carr 285, Baker Mayfield 308, Tom Brady 340, Gardner Minshew and the Jags, they threw for 350 last week. They're just an offense that raises the passing volume and the passing tide. And Carr has played well against them at home his past 2 starts. And last year, he threw 3 touchdowns in that game. One to Lee Smith, one to Seth Roberts. Definitely like that they're a little more concentrated on offense, between Waller, Williams, and Jacobs too. So I'm in. I think the Oakland guys are objectively good plays, and the fact that they got grandfathered in on pricing because they played late on Monday night, there's a reason they're going to have so much cash ownership. I mean, in tournaments you can pivot and go in other directions, but I totally understand playing those guys in cash. It makes a lot of sense based on matchup price and what you can do in terms of what you can do to build out the rest of your rosters. You don't have to play all 3 together, but I mean, the pro side of the argument is there for all of them, especially when we factor in price. I mean, I still have Diggs over Tyler Boyd, Jose, but I mean, it's not like I'm down on Boyd either. It's just simply like a numbers game where if you're asking me to play guys, put guys on a linear list, he's gonna be a little bit higher, but it doesn't make Boyd a bad play by any means. And obviously, in a lot of these situations, when you ask these types of questions, it also comes down to just like who finds the end zone. That ruins a lot of these. Or not ruins them, but is the differentiator, the thing that makes it skew to one player or not. It's just typically players in the same bucket. It's just who scores that touchdown this week. In PPR flex, I mean, I still would go with Lockett over Ingram. I get it, man. I totally would get it with Evan Ingram. I mean, the volume is going to be there at 14 targets week 1, but you're talking about, again, a wide receiver that has a really good matchup. I talked about the slot splits for the Steelers defense. They're not going to, they don't bracket guys. They don't double team like receivers. They don't really alter their defensive game plan. And like the types of targets that Lockett gets are just so weighted. I mean, Evan Ingram's in it. It's a great spot to stack volume. I get it. Bills were number 1, in success rate allowed to tight ends a year ago. Just a good defensive team in general, pass defense. Not to throw it. I can't really throw shade on Ingram at all. I wouldn't really go looking to bench him. But we're talking about playing wide receivers in fantasy or playing tight ends over wide receivers in fantasy. It's hard objectively in a lot of situations because wide receiver targets are just so much more valuable and so much more weighted. That they've got to be just home run plays. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, you have Julio. Yeah, CMC scrambling to make and cash to make up for it. Yeah, I mean that CMC bullet is tough on Thursday. Cause even in a down game, you wouldn't have expected that. Even if you would have said McCaffrey is going to come under par, you wouldn't have gone that low. Not against the Bucs at home. Not with just 1 or 2 receptions. That's a bummer. It was a big time, crater. It was really blew that up. TJ Gurley on the rest of the season. Who would you be dropping later to grab a kicker? Malcolm Brown, Duke Johnson, Tariq Cohen. Waiting till after 4 o'clock. Gox. Leaning Tariq. Yeah, I think out of those 3 guys, it would be because I mean, if you're talking about you don't want to cut your cuff, obviously that's where you are. And then Duke is already, a guy that you're going to play over Cohen, in most weeks when you're laying it out, just because he's playing more snaps and has more versatility in terms of usage. So I mean, I guess so. I mean, it stinks. I mean, you already have the cuff, but I mean, out of those options, I would lean Cohen out of those guys if you have to drop a guy. Yeah, Houston D. I mean, came in severely underpriced on DraftKings at 2,800. They're the defensive 17 on DraftKings in the industry. They're number 4. I have them number 4. We just don't know what to expect from Minshew in his first road start. I mean, we want to root for Minshew, especially since he's got so much swag now. He's coming out, with all this different gear on. He's a hard guy not to root against. But 2,800 on DK, just far too cheap for Houston D. 2 of 4, Diggs, Thielen, Boyd, or Lockett for DK. I think it depends what you're doing and how you're just doing your game stacks. But I would say Thielen would be the top guy for me out of those guys we're just talking about. I'm going to put them on a linear list, and you're making me say this guy or this guy. Because I have all these guys that mixed in ownership. I would have them Thielen, Diggs, Lockett, Boyd in that order. If you're making me put them in a linear list, but I have ownership of all these guys. It just depends what kind of stacks, what kind of game stacks you're running them back with, and how you're diversifying, your lineups. Richard, I would have Jameson Crowder on MVS. We talked about Crowder and Simeon a little bit earlier. I don't think it really alters his floor really at all. He's really he's really just the same type of outlook. Let's see, slowing down here. See if we can get a couple more in. Robert, tough one. How do you expect Jacobs versus Giants? What are we looking at? Jacobs versus the Giants. I'm not sure what we're looking at. I mean, are we expecting Josh Jacobs? Oh, Josh Allen? Are we expecting Josh Allen? Yeah. I mean, I'm in on Josh Allen. I mean, the only thing versatility-wise, I think when you're talking about streamers is the edge. I feel like Carr is just a little bit safer and has a little bit safer floor, but Josh Allen is definitely all in on a ceiling play, type of ceiling play. We saw the Giants last week not be able to. They look lost the whole game defensively against the Cowboys. But for game total, I said like Carr is just his team probably will be projected to score more points. They'll have to throw more. If the Bills control the game script against the Giants, is Josh Allen going to be one? Are we going to get those scramble attempts from Josh Allen? Are we going to get him running around? In the second half of that game, it would be my only like little bit of shade I would throw. But he's high on my list of streamers and high on my quarterback rankings this week. As guys I would look for. And then when you're talking about in DFS, like Josh Allen is always the guy in like my model that's going to have the biggest gap from ceiling to floor potential. So he always is a guy you want to kind of build a GPP team around and have some exposure to. Yeah, Richard, I have Damian Williams still over Aaron Jones. I know some people are freaking out about the split, but even in a split in that offense is fine. And if he's going to get the types of touches he's getting, it doesn't matter if McCoy gets more rushing attempts. And plus efficiency oscillates anyways. Like he didn't have a good game in terms of efficiency on the ground, but yards per carry are volatile. He can come out today and against the Raiders and only have 10 rushes, but he could be the guy that has 5 yards per carry. It could easily swing, but in terms of his situation, he still was the guy running all the pass routes, getting all the targets in the passing game, and was the guy they used inside the 5 when they were inside the 5. He was the guy in the field. So I mean. Shady can get more snaps, and he deserves more snaps with the way he looked last week in comparison to how Damian Williams ran. But for fantasy, like the money touches were still all of Damian Williams. He still controlled all of the money touches, receptions, and goal line looks. So, I mean, I'm not that scared of that split yet to this point. And in a game against Oakland, which we know is exploitable defensively more than the Jaguars were, even though they had no trouble carving through the Jaguars. But it's just an objectively better matchup against the Raiders than it is the Jaguars on paper. See if we can just sneak a couple more here as we approach the 50-minute mark here. I don't think San Diego or LA Chargers becomes a shootout versus Detroit. Just because of the injuries, in the slower pace, and then coming off overtime. I wrote in a betting article about the trends about teams coming over off of overtime and having to travel. Play on the road off of overtime is one of the worst spots for teams and team performance. So I mean, I have a hard time thinking it's gonna go over just based on that and the pace. And then no, Mike Williams is only going to be. It sounds like being a package based player. He's going to be limited. He's playing, but is going to be limited. I don't know if we see that play out or not. But no Hunter Henry, and they don't really. And they don't really have. We saw last year. Just because Hunter Henry's out, it doesn't elevate these other tight ends now. I had a lot of questions about Virgil Green. Picking Virgil Green up. It's just hard to really go to that well. Travis Benjamin's a guy we don't really fully trust. Kind of more of just like a tournament dart. So I mean, I expected the game to be a little bit slower. Yeah, but and like you said, it's already gotten bet down a little bit, and general public typically doesn't move lines down. It's where big money comes from. Yeah, and then you add same thing in Tennessee and Indy. So I mean, Indy's in that same boat, off road, off overtime, on their second road game in a row, which is double down on a bad kind of situation. I could see it still getting there. I could see that game still getting to the over. I don't know if it completely pops though for fantasy. I think the problem with the Colts and like all their games kind of pop is just how they used Jacoby Brissett last week. He was more of a caretaker. They leaned on that offensive line. It's so good, that offensive line. I mean, that touchdown Marlon Mack had, we could have I would have picked up probably 9 yards on that play. I would have got the full 50-yard tud, but I think I would have got 8 to 9 yards through that hole, for sure on that one. But we saw them just use Jacoby Brissett as kind of a guy that the bus driver. He was in the bus driver role. Just we're going to lean on our run game. We're going to ask you to not throw the ball, down the field a lot. Just kind of move the sticks. That was their game plan. I think that's going to be their game plan. Moving forward. And they have effective personnel too. So I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you had some third and ones they passed. Yeah, I mean, they're a team that can mix their personnel up and create definitely favorable spots. Frank Reich is a guy who knows objectively when to throw to. Coming from the Eagles background and how they used their personnel last year. But I mean, they still didn't ask Brissett to do a whole lot like vertically and like put the game at risk. They still wanted to. They played more for first downs, more than that success rate game. And I think that's basically going to be approached. We want every play to be as successful as possible, um, instead of try to get in these shootouts. But yeah, as we're closing up here, 55 minutes. Questions kind of slowed down. Just want to say, yeah, as usual, you guys, come join the chat. Talk about whatever you want. Ask me anything you want, whether it be DFS, player props, start sits, anything you guys want. We'll let you guys steer the conversation. We'll do them on Thursdays and Sundays before the main lineup's locked. So definitely pop in. Obviously reach out on Twitter. If I somehow didn't get to something on here, if something comes up last second, just reach out. And then everyone have a good week 2. We'll reconvene Thursday, and we'll talk again. Good luck, everyone.